Starting off this countdown, we have absolving sins with money. Basically, back in the day, the Catholic Church told people that they could absolve their sins and get a ticket to heaven if they just paid them. Like, you were paying the church for forgiveness. Sorry, that's not how these things work. It also got to the point where people were paying for future sins. Not only that, they claimed that for a fee, relatives could get their deceased loved ones out of purgatory. And people fell for this all. Not only that, but poor people thought that they were screwed. They're like, if we sin, it's over. We can't afford to pay to get our sins forgiven. I wouldn't be surprised if the rich went around committing crimes and killing people, then being like, here's some cash, I'm all good now, thanks. In our 9th spot, we have Imprisoning Galileo. In 1663, Galileo was like, science is greater than God. He also said that the sun was the center of the universe and claimed that the earth moved around it. I mean, he was on to something there, but just, he was slightly off. Anyways, the church didn't like these claims because it conflicted with the teachings of the church, so they imprisoned him. He was imprisoned in his home for years. I mean, they threatened him with torture, imprisonment, and even being burned at the stake, so let's just say he got off easy compared to those other punishments. It wasn't until 350 years later did the church be like, okay, yes, we agree, Galileo was on to something. Moving on to number 8, we have cutting funding. For years, the church gave thousands of dollars to a non-profit organization, Compañeros, that would help Hispanic immigrants get access to healthcare, among other things. That was until they found out that Compañeros supported a gay and lesbian rights group. So the church cut the funding to this company for their connection to the LGBTQ2S+ community. They're not the only group that the church has done this to though. No, apparently, and I quote, since 2010, 9 groups from across the country have lost financing from the campaign because of conflicts with Catholic principles. Moving on to number 7, we have the Gay Clergy Member. In 2018, a secret Catholic group came forward claiming they had information all about their clergy member, Monsignor Jeffrey Burrell. They claimed that he was using the gay male dating app Grindr and would visit gay bars weekly. Now let me just say, there's nothing wrong with being gay. What's wrong is shaming this poor man and outing him, and the poor man had to resign. Obviously, this is something the Catholic Church doesn't want us to know. Why? Because they say homosexual acts is immoral and contrary to the natural law. They also say homosexual tendencies are objectively disordered. And they also preach celibacy. So having a clergy member that is gay is highly controversial for them, and they tried to hide it. A lot of Catholics were outraged when word got out. Scariest part is how they found out about Jeffrey in the first place. Apparently the group was tracking his movements based on the apps he was using. Pretty terrifying and also very, very wrong. Moving on to number 6, we have Joan of Arc. Turns out that the church wasn't the biggest fan of Joan of Arc. In fact, at one point she was pretty much the Catholic Church's #1 public enemy. Long story short, she believed that God was speaking to her and had told her to start an uprising to get the English out of France. By doing so, she pissed off some high-powered Catholics who wanted her gone. So they decided to put her up for trial. But legit, they had no evidence against her, but they were like, whatever, fake it till you make it, right? So they just accused her of heresy with no evidence cause it was a lie. And on top of that, they denied her counsel, which was against the church's rules. They just hated her and wanted to get rid of her. I think there were like 70+ charges brought up against her. One of them being for wearing men's clothing, in which she was burned at the stake for. In 1431, in front of a crowd of thousands of people, they lit her on fire for wearing male clothing. But it was discovered after her death that she never even did this. Literally, they killed an innocent woman. Why? Because they were probably intimidated by her. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the slaying of women. Pope Innocent VII wasn't innocent at all. In fact, he was terrified of witches. He said that they were real and a huge threat, so he created a huge witch hunt. He dispatched his men to Germany to try witches, and due to the pressure he put on them, countless innocent women were killed after being accused of being witches. All because Pope Innocent was paranoid as hell. Not only that, but in 1487 a book was written all about these witches. It said that this book promoted burning them at the stake stake, and that influenced a number of killings. Plus, the book was just filled with lies, like saying these women would stop cows from producing milk and would ride on broomsticks in the air. It's just truly messed up and spread misinformation and paranoia. In our fourth spot, we have the burning of the dead. Apparently, the church holds grudges because 43 years after John Wycliffe passed away, they had his body dug up and burned. Now, let me explain how it got to this point. So, John saw fault in the Roman Catholic Church and saw how it was corrupt. So he believed that people should worship God and Jesus according to the Bible, not according to the popes and their bishops and priests, because people are corrupt. But the Bible is not. He also believed that people should interpret the Bible for themselves and not how other people tell them to interpret it. Well, the church did not like this at all. So when he passed away, they ordered all his books to be burned. They also ordered for his body to be unburied. And for some reason, it took them years to get this all done. So 43 years later, his body was finally unburied and then torched, and then his ashes were just thrown into the river. In our third spot, we have the misuse of power. Just this year, it was discovered that the French clergy had taken advantage of over 200,000 young individuals since the 1950s. It is absolutely disgusting. The height of this happened between the 1950s to the 1970s. That's when most of the cases were discovered. Then there was a resurgence of cases in the early 1990s. And obviously the Catholic Church doesn't want anyone to know about this. In fact, it's obvious that the church was turning a blind eye to the perpetrators. They were more focused on protecting themselves and their reputation. They did not care for the victims at all. A report said, and I quote, "The Catholic Church's immediate reaction was to protect itself as an institution, and it has shown complete, even cruel indifference to those having suffered abuse." Like I said, it's absolutely disgusting. Moving on to number 2, we have the number of priests. In January of 2002, it was discovered that 234 priests have had allegations of sexual misconduct made against them in the last 50 years. You heard me, 234. That just makes me sick to my stomach. These individuals are using their title and control to take advantage of others. Some of the victims did file lawsuits against a number of dioceses and got multiple $million-dollar settlements in some cases, but that still does not take away their trauma and their PTSD. Even though the Catholic Church held a worldwide summit to talk about all this, it wasn't that effective, as priests were still caught taking advantage of individuals years later. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the Inquisitions. It should not be forgotten that the Catholic Church would routinely arrest and torture Jews, Muslims, along with other individuals of different religions. They literally were like, convert to our beliefs or be executed, it's your choice. They were given a warning. They were told to vacate the area, and the people that stayed were arrested, and then either forced to convert or be executed. Sometimes they even tortured them before execution. They used branding, would hang them from their thumbs or toes, and would break their bones. After that, that's when they were strangled and then burned at the stake. Starting off this countdown, we have Pope Boniface VIII. This dude was the definition of corrupt and disgusting. So he was the head of the Catholic Church from 1294 until his death in 1303. Let's just say that he did not practice what the church was preaching. This dude was known to take advantage of a number of young men. In response, he said that it was as natural as rubbing one hand against the other. So he said taking advantage of the young was totally fine. Not only that, but one time he got it on with a married woman and her daughter. I know. It's gross. In our 9th spot, we have simony. Simony is something that was practiced around the Middle Ages. It's the act of buying your way into church offices. This became a huge problem in the 9th and 10th century. So basically, the church was selling positions in the office. This allowed people who had money to become clergy members. Half the time, they weren't even educated and couldn't even read or didn't know how to perform ordinary religious services. But what the church only cared about was money. In 1487, the Pope sold 24 offices, and people were outraged because because unqualified people were becoming bishops or cardinals. The church would also do this with religious items. They would sell them for tons of money and people would foolishly buy them from the church. In our 8th spot, we have the Pittsburgh Priests. A couple of years ago, it was revealed that 6 Pennsylvania priests routinely took advantage of a number of individuals over the course of several decades. One disturbing report claims that they made a young man pose like Christ on the cross while they photographed him doing so. The photos were then sent to a number of other priests. The total amount of priests accused are 300. This is absolutely disgusting and I feel so bad for the innocent victims that were taken advantage of. In our 7th spot, we have ignoring the situation. When Pope Francis heard the story that I just mentioned, you know what he had to say? He said, and I quote, "Most of these cases belong in the past." Meaning, hey, thanks for coming forward, but let's move on from the past and ignore everything that happened. He continued on saying, and I quote, "If one member suffers, all suffer together with it." He said that after it was revealed how many priests were found guilty. Now, people weren't happy by him saying this because, first off, he's never going to feel the same suffering as the victims, and second, he's more worried about how bad this makes the church look rather than bringing justice for the victims. In our 6th spot, we have hiding the past. People are incredibly furious how the Pope handled all of the allegations made against the priests. The right thing for him to do would be allow criminal authorities to access the church records worldwide, so they can try and get justice for all the victims and get rid of the men taking advantage of their power and position. But of course, he won't allow that, nor will the other men who run the church. Instead, it's let's keep it all hush hush and hope no other victims come forward. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the Years of Coverups. Back in 2018, it was revealed that Bishop Juan Barros of Chile was accused of covering up clerical abuse for years. The bishop denied, saying he never knew about this, but one of the victims say that he was there when one of the incidents happened and bore witness to it all and then did nothing. For years, this bishop covered up several incidences and protected the perpetrators. This just makes me sick. After being called out though, he did resign. Coming in at number 4, we have the Punishments for Disobeying. Bishop Gonzalo Duarte Garcia de Cortazar is another member of the Catholic Church that used his power to take advantage of a number of individuals. There were reports of him doing this all the way back to 1992. Back in 1992, he publicly slapped a student because the student refused to kiss him on the lips. In fact, this was common. If the students wouldn't do as he told them to, they would be slapped or punished. And Bishop Juan Barros was responsible for covering this all up, so word wouldn't get out. Coming in at number 3, we have the slush funds. The church has also been known to do sketchy and illegal things with their money, such as move Vatican money through slush funds across Europe. On top of that, they used $250 million of the church's money to invest in luxury London apartments, which ultimately tanked. They even contemplated investing hundreds of millions of dollars into oil fields. This money was supposed to support palpable charities. They also have a history of embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering. How great is that? Of course though, they'll always get away with it because they're the church. Moving on to number 2, we have the ties with Hitler. Did you know that during World War II, the church actually made a deal with Hitler? Yeah. The deal allowed the dictator to increase his power in Germany without interference from the church if he promised to basically leave the church alone. So instead of standing up to him and the horrors that he was committing, they turned a blind eye and were like, leave us alone and we'll leave you alone. On top of that, in 1939, on the dictator's 50th birthday, they flew Nazi flags for him. Then they actually received tons of money from him, but used the IOR to hide this, so it wouldn't look like they profited from their relationship with the dictator, when in fact, we all know that they did. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the Catholic clergy in France. Just this year, it was found that Catholic clergy members in France took advantage of over 216,000 individuals over the past 7 decades. Again, that is absolutely disgusting. On top of that, a report found that the church prioritized its own protection, so it told the victims to stay silent. It said that between 29,000 to 32,000 predators worked in the French Catholic Church between 1950 to 2020. The report also found, and I quote, "The church's attitude could be summarized as one of concealment, relativization, or even denial, with only a very recent recognition dating from 2015. The Catholic Church's immediate reaction Inquisition was to protect itself as an institution, and it has shown complete, even cruel indifference to those having suffered. Starting off this countdown, we have the nuns. In 2019, Pope Francis for the first time addressed the horrors that happened to nuns in the Catholic Church. Priests and bishops and other church officials have been taking advantage of nuns for ages. This was an ongoing problem for years, and the church wasn't doing anything about it. They were too busy focusing on covering up even bigger scandals and issues. Over the years, more and more nuns have come forward saying that they were victims. Some were afraid to speak up because they were dependent on the church and literally couldn't leave. Although Pope Francis acknowledged what happened, it's unclear the steps they are taking to prevent it in the future. In our ninth spot today, we have the Knights Templar. So Philip IV of France, as well as the Catholic Church, are directly responsible for torturing and executing innocent individuals back in the 14th century. Basically, Philip did not like the Templars in Spain and wanted to get rid of them. So he sent out his men to round them up, arrest them, and then imprison them. He then accused the innocent men of terrible crimes like sodomy, heresy, and renouncing Christ. Any of those crimes were punishable by the death penalty. Again, they were innocent, he just wanted to get rid of the Templar order. He then would torture the Templars so that they would confess. He would use a rack to stretch out their shoulders until they dislocated. Or he would have their private parts smashed. This was all done while the church knew that the men were innocent. In our 8th spot, we have Pope Pius XII. In this case, it's what the church didn't do. According to a recent discovery of archives, Pope Pius XII was fully aware what the Nazis were doing during the Holocaust and chose to remain silent. He knew of the mass executions of the Jewish individuals and he dismissed this all. In fact, he said that they were unable to confirm the crimes, so that's why he didn't speak up against them. It says a lot when they refused to publicly condemn the Nazis. In fact, apparently his silence was so that the Germans didn't come for them, so that the church could always be successful. They were just caring about themselves and not about the thousands of innocent individuals being killed. Moving on to number 7, we have the violent murders. Back in 1095, Pope Urban II gave rise to the Crusades during his reign as the head of the Catholic Church. He called all Christians in Europe to go to war against the Muslims. And it was not pretty. It literally said that they killed so many Muslims that the street ran with blood. And this was only the beginning. Waves of crusades continued until 1396, and although Catholics were not the only religion involved in mass violence, Pope Urban got it all started. And it was a violent time to say the least. Everyone was killed, no matter their age. Some people's heads were even put on sticks and then they would carry them around to scare others. Like, that is hella messed up. In our 6th spot today, we have William Tyndale. During the 16th century, William took it upon himself to translate the Bible into vernacular English so that more people were able to read it. But for some reason, the Catholic Church did not like him doing this, which is weird. Wouldn't they want the Bible translated so more people would become followers of it? Anyways, William actually had to go into hiding because the church was coming for him. They even burned copies of the Bible that were being smuggled around Europe. In the end, William was captured, tried for heresy, and then burned at the stake. He literally did nothing wrong. Want to know something even more messed up? Years later, the church was like, yes, let's translate the Bibles. They then turned to William's translations and used a whole lot of it, and then they never even apologized. Ridiculous. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Pope Alexander VI. So, Pope Alexander VI was said to be one of the worst popes in history. Why? Well, he is known for something known as the Banquet of Chestnuts. He basically invited 50 women over and told them to strip for him. Then he threw chestnuts on the floor and forced the women to get on their hands and knees and just surround their feet like animals. To make matters worse, he told the men that he invited that he would give the man who could get it on with the most women jewelry or fine clothes. So then they were all fighting over these women. This guy was hella corrupt and sick. Not only that, but he liked to watch horses get it on. That is disgusting. In our fourth spot today, we have the cover-ups. So a lot of shady stuff has gone down with the Catholic Church. There's no denying that. For years, the church knew all about the scandals surrounding the leaders of the church and how they would take advantage of innocent individuals, but they kept brushing this issue under the rug. Then in 2001, the Vatican told them that any cases should be reported directly to the Vatican hierarchy. Years later, they still weren't dealing with any of these cases. In 2004, instead of getting rid of the priests in question, they just moved them to different churches or different countries. So that didn't really stop them. They just had a new set of people that they could take advantage of. They literally cared more about their priests than the victims. Moving on at number 3, we have the grooming. Over the years, people of power at the church have groomed a number of young individuals. Today, I'm sharing the story of Michael. When he was young, he was groomed and forced into doing things he didn't want to do. One of the brothers of the church would bring him to Broadway shows and movies. This was all part of the grooming process. Then when he entered the congregation of Christian brothers, that's when he was abused and groomed by 4 or 5 different men. This is absolutely disgusting, and of course the church would do any and everything to make sure Michael's story or others didn't get out. In our second spot, we have the funding. CBC News and the Globe and Mail recently obtained files that expose the Catholic Church for spending some of the $79 million that it agreed to pay residential school survivors. That's right, they spent money that was meant to go to survivors of their residential schools. But instead, they took most of that money and put it into things like their Bible study group or for their personal lawyers and unapproved loans. Whereas other churches, including the Anglican, United, and Presbyterian Church, paid the full amount of compensation owed to the survivors without an issue. But the Catholic Church took the money and used it for themselves, which is disgusting since they played the biggest role in residential schools and the horrors that took place there. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the unmarked graves. Earlier this year, thousands of unmarked graves have been found by residential schools across Canada. Residential schools were funded by the federal government and run by the churches. They would tear families apart, taking the children and forcing them into these schools in order to assimilate them, and they were stripped of their native language and culture and traditions. While in the schools, they were treated terribly. They were neglected, tortured, and even murdered. In these unmarked graves, thousands of innocent young individuals were found. This went on for 120 years. Tens of thousands of Indigenous children were sent to these schools. Thousands never returned home. Currently, the grounds are being searched for unmarked graves at the Mohawk Institute, and soon more and more residential school grounds will be explored. And sadly, we all know more bones are going to be unearthed. It's a very sad and tragic reality.